Hey, Ledger Baptist. I'm really glad to be here with you today. I'm just going to do the the weekly recap video for you, just to kind of give you some insight of where we've been and where we're going. Just a reminder, we finished last week in Deuteronomy, and we will take a quick stop in Psalms and then head to Joshua for the first 11 chapters. You'll see throughout the chronological Bible study that Psalms is kind of dropped in at various places. And in this particular case, it's said that maybe Psalm 91 was one of Moses' songs, so that's likely why they chose to put it in this particular spot. Just as a review of where we've come so far, we have the Israelites preparing to go into the Promised Land. They are being reminded several times by Moses of the law that God had given them, 10 Commandments, and additionally they're given a bunch of regulations on how to live, just for their safety, for spiritual renewal, for community living, and also I'd say from what I've been reading, a lot of it is in preparation to the fact that they're going into a land of a very sinful community of Canaanites that have been living just in a way that would be very opposite of God's holiness. So they're preparing them spiritually, God is preparing them physically for what they're going to be up against. In the end of Deuteronomy, we talk about Moses' farewell. Moses has been the main character here for a long time, so now it's time for Moses to kind of step out of the light, and he will be passing. He says his final farewell, and in these final chapters of Deuteronomy, Moses dies on the mountain and God buries him. He has the opportunity to say a final farewell, encouraging the Israelites to be strong and courageous and trust in God, and just to also give the priests a reminder of the value of the Word of God. God tells him that God lets Moses know that Israel will fall, and we'll see that in the coming chapters that we read going through the chronological study. We'll see the journey of Israel as they make the choices that they do. God commissions Joshua. As we had read, God asked Moses to kind of pass on to Joshua and let the people know that he was going to be the leader that would be taking them on the next part of their journey, that they needed to trust in Joshua, and that God would be with Joshua like he was with Moses. God gives Moses a song to pass on to the people for public worship. He is called to the mountain of death. He blesses Israel and begs them to trust God. Moses climbs up on the mountain, he views the land, and then God, as I said before, God buries him. And then as we move on, we move into the beginning of Joshua, where Joshua prepares for the first battle in the Promised Land. They cross the Jordan, and interestingly, I thought a note as they were preparing to cross the Jordan, it was interesting to find out that God had the priests go first. It seems very backwards in a lot of the ways that we read in the Bible, what you think would be a logical way of doing that. You would think you'd want somebody that was strong and brave and courageous, but they send the spiritual leaders first to hold the waters, right? That God parts the waters for them again, and they're able to pass through. And there's a lot of representations of the way the tribes are laid out. I know in that section also, each tribe is intended to, one person from the tribe is intended to carry a stone that creates an altar as a form of remembrance for what for what has happened. And that's like a common theme throughout, right? Just remember where you've been, remember where you're going, and God has a plan. And if you lean in on Him and obey, God's the outcome will be blessing. We know that the Israelites struggle with that as we do. So we continue on their story. Joshua takes the lead, and God reminds him that He will be with him if he continues to trust Him. They reinforce the importance of the law and reading the law. They send the spies into the land, which is where we meet Rahab. And also interesting, I thought that Rahab had great faith, but they talk about how God was so renowned in the area for what the Israelites had already come through that this people in this land were talking about them. So these people in Jericho were intimidated. They were scared of of the one true God because of the power that he had shown to this point. So we see that Rahab showed great faith. She hid the spies, she protected them, and she asked in return for protection for her. So when the Battle of Jericho occurred and the Israelites took the battle, they protected Rahab, and she continued on with the Israelites as they continued to conquest. We find out before that Battle of Jericho that the commander of the Lord's army appears. We don't know exactly who that is. I mean, I think there's a lot of theories on that, but ultimately God had sent the commander of the army so that the Israelites knew that he was with them and he was going before them, and that this was his intention. I mean, God was using the Israelites to pass judgment on this evil nation, in addition to fulfilling this promise that he had set out for the Israelites. So God conquers Jericho, and as we move on, Joshua continues to take Israel into battle. We find out that there is sin in the tribes. Achan chooses to take something that he was told not to take, and he hides it under his tent. It is found that as Israel goes into the next battle, they lose because there was sin in the camp, and Achan had committed this sin. It is rooted out. As we see, God hates sin. He rooted it out. The whole family was sentenced to death because of this, and so that is a reason their loss in that battle was a result of the choices that were made, the bad choices that were made. And so they have an opportunity. Then they remove the sin from their camp, and God gives them the opportunity to to go into battle once again in Ai, and they win the next time because they are, they've kind of dealt with the issues that they needed to deal with. From there, we see that God continues to be with Joshua and the Israelites, and they just continue on their conquest, and they have the victory because God is with them, and Joshua is leaning on God for the decisions that he made. And there's a lot of, I think there's a lot to learn in those chapters just about that, like the obedience and just relying on God and all the things that we do, because we can easily want to take control over everything in our lives, even the simplest things. So these chapters were great reminders, right, of just leaning in on God, listening to God, listening for his wisdom in how we make decisions and how we go through our lives. And I think for me, something I thought was really interesting was that, prior to these major battles, I mean, this was like a huge conquest they were heading on. They had already come through a few victories prior to crossing the Jordan, but God has Joshua circumcise the whole army because they had not been circumcised in the desert. The practice wasn't kept. I know one commentary I read was that maybe they did not keep that practice because they were discouraged when they found out they wouldn't be able to go into the promised land because they had made some mistakes. But ultimately, these men were like really compromised as they were going into the major battles. And I think that's another way, like how God was showing them that it was not by their power at all that they were going to win these battles, that God was going to use them in the ways he was going to use them, and it was his glory that was going to be gained in all of it. So I hope you guys had a great week reading. I hope that you've been asking a lot of questions, writing a lot of questions down, and it's really been, I know I've really enjoyed it as I've been going through the weekly readings and just kind of like following this path with the Israelites, seeing the things that I can, relate to too. We always want to go our own way. So God reminds us that we can't. All right, I hope you guys are having a good week, and I'll see you on Sunday. Thanks.